This is Bipolar State of Mind, discussing all things bipolar, Tuesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern. Hello, people. This is your host, Mystique McKenzie, and this is another episode of Bipolar State of Mind. Today, we're going to discuss ecotherapy. The first two episodes were about what I really feel mental illness is, the perspective from a spiritual standpoint, and the traditional therapies shamanic healers and ancient healers use to actually cure mental illness. But today we're going to be talking about what we can do over here in the United States. We're not so traditional, we're not so spiritual per se. At least there hasn't been a whole lot of ancestral spiritual wisdom handed down in practice in this country, but we can still do things to help integrate the energies that I believe are the cause of many mental illnesses out there today. So in this episode, I'll be playing an interview of Theodore Roszack, who was a 20th century historian focusing on research on the effects of culture and behavior. He is the founder of the eco-psychology movement. In this interview, he explains how isolation and disconnection from Earth and from each other as humanity is most likely a big reason for mental illness today, and how we can connect with humanity and nature to actually resolve the issue. Listen here.
Well, I concluded that Freud's influence in this respect has been absolutely decisive. Jung, his great disciple, tried to find his way around this position Freud had adopted and tried to find a more religious, more spiritual interpretation of the psyche, which is one of the reasons Freud and Jung fell out with one another. Most other followers of Freud and the schools that followed the post-Freudians simply assumed that Freud was correct about the connection between the psyche and the natural environment. And the result of that has been, if you look at psychiatric literature as a whole, there's almost no mention in it of the non-human world, as if it just doesn't matter. Indeed, you find extreme examples of this in a development following World War II, existential therapy, for example. It is simply assumed that human beings exist in a condition of alienation from nature. Indeed, that's the key problem that you have to address yourself to, our profound alienation as human beings in an alien universe. Well, I decided to go back beyond Freud and then to place his work within a larger framework of spiritual healing, psychotherapy in the most general sense of the term. Because if you look beyond the modern Western schools of psychiatry, you find that in traditional societies, among primary people, the people we once used to call primitives, that it is understood that sanity and madness have to be defined always in relationship to the natural habitat. And that indeed, to a very large extent, madness is understood to be an imbalance between the individual and the natural environment, or between an entire tribe or a people and its natural environment. That's a much larger conception of what sanity and madness are. And so my feeling is that the indigenous cultures have a lot to offer our understanding of sanity and madness in this one significant respect, that there has to be a balance between the psyche and the natural world around us. That, I think, has profound ecological implications.
Well, one of the really controversial issues in modern psychiatry and psychology is the whole issue of the social system itself. What happens when the social system is mad or insane?
Yeah.
Can you have sane people?
Yeah, Freud also addressed himself to this issue, asking the question, how do we define madness if we suspect that an entire culture may be embedded in what he called collusive madness or communal neuroses? Where does the therapist then look for a baseline to define sanity and madness? Freud raised this issue. He never came up with a successful answer to it. Later schools, like radical therapists, they have called into question the existing social definition of madness. and sanity in ways that have profound social implications. Perhaps an entire society is mad, in which case you don't simply want to adjust people back into another condition of madness. The way in which I take this issue up is to suggest that there is a madness involved in urban industrial society that has to do with our lack of balance and integration with the natural environment, that this might be an interesting baseline to use for the definition of sanity as we move into the next century. That is, we need to recapture that sense of being embedded in nature, being in a condition of reciprocity with nature that you do find in traditional forms of healing. Now, I don't think we can simply adopt any other culture's conception of sanity and madness. We have to work on our own. And that, I want to suggest, is as much a job of the ecologist as it is of the therapist. So eco-psychology is the term I've used to try to define a common ground between two fields that have so far not been on speaking terms. Psychologists on the one side, and ecologists on the other. Psychology needs ecology, ecology needs psychology. Ideally, someday we wouldn't use a term like eco-psychology. Psychology would be understood to have an ecological framework. But at this point, that is still to be worked out.
At this point, we have ecologists who are like prophets in the wilderness, warning us that the course our civilization is taking on a global basis is madness, that we're headed for self-destruction, that we are fouling our habitats.
I've been concerned about the fact that many environmentalists have been sounding very few notes in appealing to the public. They refer to fear, they refer to guilt, they seek to shock, they seek to shame. I understand why. The problems are urgent, and I accept the urgency of these problems. I don't question that at all. But it may be important to ask at some point whether we've done too much of that in the environmental movement, which I consider myself to be a part of, and that perhaps we have to find other themes to introduce, other notes to sound, that are more positive and more affirmative. At a certain point, this becomes a challenge to the environmental movement. Do we believe that human beings are bonded to this planet in a way that would allow us to invoke trust, love, respect, reciprocity as positive motivations for becoming good environmental citizens? Or do we believe there's nothing more to fall back on than duty based upon guilt, based upon shame? Guilt and shame have their place, but an appeal that is exclusively related to guilt or to shame is, I think, at a certain point going to have detrimental effects. It's going to turn people off. It's going to sound terribly negative and challenging in that bad sense in which you confront people with a problem greater than they can take hold of. I would like to see the environmental movement ask itself this question: are we not bonded to this planet by something which is life-enhancing and life-affirming, and which we can appeal to people to find within themselves a voice of the earth which speaks to them with a sense of love, respect, and trust?
I suppose ultimately the question is, which will be more effective? The environmentalists see that there's a job to be done, and they're probably using the means that they believe to be the most effective right now, and I hear you challenging them.
Well, one way to decide this is to simply recognize that the truth has to be told. To begin with, if we're dealing with problems that are urgent and life-threatening, threatening the lives of other species beyond our own, you simply have to say that. If it's true, it's true. Now, in many cases, we're not sure that it's true. We're troubled perhaps because of the uncertainty of the problem, and we have to invoke prudence more than certainty. If the problem is an urgent one, you still, at some point, I feel, have to connect with something more positive and affirmative in people. And I believe it's there. I wouldn't be saying this if I didn't believe it was there. So my article of faith is that at a very deep level, the human psyche is grafted to the planet out of which we evolved, that there is what I call an ecological unconscious. Now, whenever we invoke the unconscious, the depths of the unconscious, what we're essentially doing is pursuing a philosophical discussion of human nature. We're asking what makes people tick, what are the foundations of human behavior. And there's been, of course, a lot of speculation about that throughout psychiatric the tradition. And some people find sexuality there, others find the archetypes of the high religious traditions there. I'm suggesting that at a certain level of the unconscious mind, what we find is ecological wisdom. And that indeed, if that were not there, our species could not have survived and evolved as it has. Exactly what the ecological unconscious is and how it asserts itself and makes itself known, that's perhaps yet to be discovered once we attend to the problem. But I have floated this phrase, suggested this phrase as a hypothesis, that at the lowest level, the deepest level of the unconscious mind, we find an ecological unconscious, deeper down even than Freud's ideas about sexuality or Jung's ideas about religious archetypes, something that connects us intimately, companionably, with the flora and fauna, the mountains, the rivers, the natural world around us.
Well, it would seem to be a pretty logical and sensible thing when you think that we each carry within our bodies the genetic codes that have evolved over billions of years on this planet and are applicable to all other living systems.
Well, I think that's one way to look at it, that we carry within ourselves this heritage, which takes the form of the genetic code. And then the question is to what degree that affects the psyche. Is the psyche not itself an evolutionary phenomenon? I believe that it is. I mean, for that matter, even Freud believed that it was. In fact, one of the things that made Freud feel most scientific was the degree to which he could rely upon Darwin and evolution. But Freud had a very skewed idea about Darwin and evolution. Freud was very much of a social Darwinist. His image of early humanity was a primal horde made up of rapacious, savage people, perhaps rather the Victorian vision of primitive people in darkest Africa. There's a lot more personal projection in that than real science. So Freud's use of Darwin and his use of evolution was kinked, it was distorted. But if we take the same tack that he did, that the human psyche must have evolved out of that kind of a background, that it has behind it thousands of years of evolutionary development, then it's reasonable to assume that it does connect in intimate and significant ways with the natural environment out of which we evolved, and that that's there to be found. And that the essence of sanity, in this case as in all cases, is tapping the deep unconscious. But the question is what you find there. And in eco-psychology, what you're looking for is our bond with the natural world.
Now, okay, this professor, or he's deceased now. He is actually, he was a retired professor, I believe, at the time that this was recorded. But he goes into the specific details of that eco-consciousness, the psyche being connected to the earth. They mentioned that Freud was actually hitting on the subject matter of, does our psyche really depend upon our connection with nature? And I think it's quite interesting how the shaman Malidoma Somé has given us the information about not having that energy, that spirit that's coming from a quote-unquote another world, which would be Mother Nature, the world of the natural world that we live in but don't quite understand to its fullest, coming through trying to connect with us so that we have the messages we need to thrive and to survive and to grow as a human consciousness and as human beings. Unfortunately, consumerism, just capitalism, and so many other violent, natured, just phenomena, activities, environments have stunted our growth as humans, our growth to evolve spiritually. And I think that, just like Malidoma Somé said, those energies are trying to come through to people. Those energies are trying to make themselves known so that we can evolve healthily with our planet. And people suffering from mental illness tap into those energies. They can't cope in these manufactured and these artificial environments. We need to be connected to nature. That's how we thrive. That's how we grow individually. And that's how we will thrive and how we will grow as a collective humanity. Well, that's it for today. This is Bipolar State of Mind. I'm your host, Mystique McKenzie. And the next episodes are going to get quite interesting with my personal life. Bipolar disorder is quite colorful, for lack of better terms. I've had plenty experiences that didn't really add up to me until I realized, okay, everything that I've been through, everything that I'm, all these symptoms, my life has been quite a roller coaster ride. So I will be presenting to you guys a personal essay in the next episode, sharing a lot of controversial or unconventional and very delicate things that have happened to me and how my life kind of has turned out due to me not knowing that I may be bipolar and not even understanding how to get treatment or even realizing that it was an issue. So that's where I am at my point in life right now. I've acknowledged it. I'm trying to actually get evaluated for it and figure out a course of treatment that might work for me. And I believe ecotherapy is the route I'm going to go. It's what I've actually used inadvertently in the past, and it's worked well enough to keep me, grounded, to not do anything extreme. My life does look a little crazy on paper, but I've been blessed to not have extreme depression or extreme mania, thank God. Alrighty, guys, I'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye.